Why my eyes, sir? You've never used them before.
So, Netflix premiered its new series, Three Body Problem, and I had no idea this thing was coming out. I hadn't heard a word until a friend mentioned it the day it premiered, and she looked at me all puzzled, like me of all people should know about all these new shows being released, and, I can't have eyes everywhere all the time, it is what it is, but the synchronicity for me here is crazy. Because I just finished a video titled CERN, the Simulation and Many Worlds, where the groundwork for this analysis has already been made, and I never saw it coming. The connections here are just stunning. Now, this is not going to be a deep dive, exhaustive analysis of Three Body Problem, which I found to be a bit contrived. I'm just going to extract a few highlights, so bear with me today. I'm dealing with a lot of allergies, so my voice is a little raspy, but relax and get comfortable, and let's get into this. One thing that's standing out to me with this type of material, and I'm seeing this tactic, this device being used more and more, it's a deceptive strategy that brings to the table a false dichotomy, a false dilemma. Two powerful, impactful notions posed in opposition to each other. One is made to look false and the other true. But in reality, they are both false and lead to a single, very deceptive final conclusion, usually something affecting a worldview or impacting humanity in some dramatic way. Three Body Problem is a prime example, starting in the very powerful opening scene. It offers an accurate depiction of the thought control through brute force of the Red Guard and the persecution of those who resisted the forced collectivism of communist thought. In the opening scene, the Red Guard persecutes a physics professor for teaching the theories of relativity and the Big Bang because they are quote-unquote counter-revolutionary. The dunce cap, once the headgear of wizards, meant to be a conduit of higher esoteric knowledge. It's not about being stupid, it's about using higher wisdom in a stupid, irresponsible way. You get the dunce cap for mishandling higher knowledge. In the story, the Red Guard are willing to destroy anyone who attempted to even speak of these theories and then ruin the lives of their descendants for generations to come. These theories, quote-unquote, leave room for God, and that will not be tolerated in the communist regime and must be stamped out by the military boot forever and ever. But the Big Bang Theory and Einstein's relativity were celebrated by communist leaders and thinkers because they ultimately eliminated room for God and were in line with evolution. The Big Bang was first theorized in 1931 by Belgian cosmologist and theoretical physicist Georges Lemaitre, who crafted a scientifically valid creation story that explains the universe in a way that could leave room for God, but really left open a wide gate for esoteric ideas and evolutionary thinking. Lemaitre was a Jesuit. The Jesuit mission, since its inception, was to protect the Roman Catholic Church and its seat of global power by using the esoteric mysticism and heterodoxy of the Alumbrado, the Illuminati Brotherhood, to transform biblical doctrine into scientific humanism with a decidedly esoteric bent. Almost like arranging a handshake between God and the devil. For Lemaitre, the Big Bang was his primeval atom hypothesis, and that out of the primordial cloud, all of the known matter in the universe was compressed into a very, very tiny and infinitely dense hot mass he called the cosmic egg, two concepts extracted from Orphic and Pythagorean philosophies and furthered by the quote-unquote illumined ones of the secret societies. This cosmic egg exploded and expanded, with big emphasis on expansion, and dependent upon how much mass exists in the expanding universe, one day it will collapse in upon itself, saying bye-bye to the whole shebang. That's creatio ex nihilo, creation out of nothing. This is not only an esoteric position, but an evolutionary take that includes the notions of entropy and extinction, the eventual cosmic heat death of the universe. While the Book of Genesis wasn't designed to be a novel scientific paper detailing the mechanics of God's mystery of creation, it is explained that sound from his voice produced light in the formless and void dark expanse of the deep. A sudden explosion out of nothingness is not being described here. Quite the contrary. Genesis describes order, not chaos. The Big Bang Theory, created by a Jesuit, was designed to bring the Bible into harmony with evolutionary, esoteric thought. The Big Bang and thermodynamics are the same thing, and is an esoteric idea that was dragged into the realm of physics. It's heat and light, not sound and light. Out of nothing chaos, not order. Einstein's theory of relativity was developed to fit into the 4 laws of thermodynamics, trying to explain the universe and the trajectory of expansion, energy, momentum, and mass. In other words, Einstein expanded on the Big Bang. Big Bang and relativity are on the same page, leave zero room for God, and open a wide gate to esoterica and evolution, ideas that were considered revolutionary and absolutely vital to communist thought. Then later in episode 1, we see another false dichotomy, the idea that it is impossible to believe in God and also be a scientist.
She asks all about God. Did she ever ask you?
About God?
We are not believers in this house. We're scientists.
Ironically, Three-Body Problem goes on to introduce these mysterious alien entities who are communicating with a team of physicists through a sophisticated virtual reality gaming environment, which is also used as a recruitment tool. By the way, recruitment, an important detail that I will talk about in a minute. They refer to these entities as gods, even calling them Lord, singular Lord, not plural, because even though they are many, they are spoken of as a single entity, a collective, or dare I say, legion.
Unlike the mythical gods our species has conjured up, our Lord truly watches over us.
Aliens with godlike abilities, capable of making the stars blink in the sky, and weaponizing quantum physics, quote-unquote, breaking our science. Now here's what I'm seeing, and it's very simple. Three-Body Problem is presenting the idea of reconciling quantum mechanics with classical physics, which is impossible to do. In this story, they've not only mastered this quote-unquote godlike ability, but they've weaponized it. Of course, this idea originates with esoterica and is referred to as uniting the microcosm with the macrocosm, an idea rooted in Hermeticism and Neoplatonism and furthered by the secret societies. In my CERN, The Simulation and Many Worlds video, I exposed the esoteric mysticism behind the CERN project. For example, Crowley even spoke of it in his book Magic in Theory and Practice, where he writes, quote, "There is a single main definition of the object of all magical ritual. It is the uniting of the microcosm with the macrocosm," end quote. The Gnostic bent of this notion is evident. It is the reconciling of as above to so below. For all practicing magus, the main mission of the practicing magician was to cross the proverbial abyss to connect with the higher intelligence that is found there, that will give them the divine gnosis or knowledge of the magician's own divinity. Priorities, right? Obtaining the knowledge of the secrets of the universe comes second to discovering one's own godhood and the superhuman powers that it can provide. Crowley called the higher intelligence found in the abyss the Holy Guardian Angel, which he wrote about in his book Magic in Theory and Practice. Keep in mind, he was not reflecting on quantum physics when he wrote this. Quote, "The abyss is empty of being. It is filled with all possible forms, each equally inane, each therefore evil in the only true sense of the word. That is, meaningless but malignant insofar as it craves to become real." End quote. Superposition and quantum entanglement are terms used in quantum physics, but are concepts rooted in alchemy. In the Hermetic tradition, inside the magician is every possible state along the path to enlightenment. And through his spiritual alchemical transmutation, a process incidentally symbolized by 3 suns, he will shed all his impure states and transmutate into his final form, the divine androgyne, the perfect union of opposites, pure spiritual gold, because ultimately uniting the microcosm with the macrocosm is all about the adept uniting with the cosmos to become a divine being. Uniting the microcosm with the macrocosm, as above to so below, and the notion of superposition and quantum entanglement are esoteric ideas that have been dragged into quantum physics by the theorists who were practicing esotericists, and I'll circle back to that in a minute. Nobody has been able to reconcile the microcosm with the macrocosm. This is the stumbling block in all of physics, which brings these wannabe mystics to great frustration. The macrocosm is a well-defined system of absolute physical laws that can be observed, measured, and predicted with great accuracy. The microcosm leaves room for possibilities, for probabilities, a reality with choice built into its very fabric. These are 2 disparate systems that work in concert, but aspects of the macrocosm can be manipulated by human hands. The weather, biology, etc. The microcosm cannot. You simply cannot reconcile the microcosm with the macrocosm, but that doesn't stop them from trying. Biblically speaking, there exists only one way to reconcile the microcosm with the macrocosm, and that is through Christ Jesus, who is the bridge between the 2. So let's get into a little bit of science for a second. The findings from the double slit experiment is when these esoteric concepts were brought into the experimental realm. And for those not familiar, I explained the double slit experiment in my CERN, the Simulation, and Many Worlds video. Take a listen. The big pivot in all of this physics madness really began with one significant experimental finding: the wave function collapse that occurs when observation is included in the double slit experiment. The double slit experiment consists of the firing of electrons or photons, which are particles of matter, in an enclosed device through a panel with 2 openings. Instead of finding 2 strips of particles on the back screen, they found interference patterns, revealing that particles can act as both particles of matter and waves of potential. In an attempt to understand what happens during this process, they installed a camera to observe what exactly takes place. After the instrument for observation was part of the experiment, the waves of potential became particles. In other words, the simple process of observing and subsequently measuring, as every observation is also the act of measuring, turned waves into particles, potential into matter. They conclude somehow consciousness plays a role in this process. The event that causes wave function collapse is conscious observation and measuring. Does human consciousness play a role in the material universe? Some would like you to think so. Theoretical physicist John Wheeler, friend and colleague of Albert Einstein and Niels Bohr, and the man who coined the term black hole, said that reality is made up of information that is created by observation. For Wheeler, the observation must be made by something conscious. He asked the question, does the universe exist if we're not looking? Nobel Prize winner Frank Wilczek, looking to narrow the definition of this conscious observer, has said, quote, "Quantum theory is contentious and obscure and will remain that way until someone constructs within the formalism of quantum mechanics an observer, a model entity whose states correspond to a recognizable caricature of conscious awareness," end quote. What model entity could be capable of observing the universe in its entirety for all of time, past, present, and future? What conscious observer can be both omnipresent and omniscient, or even omnipotent to make all the necessary choices for reality to exist and keep existing? For men like Wilczek and the others, there can be only 2 possibilities. Human consciousness interacts with the universe, or the cosmos is its own conscious living being. Never at any time have they considered the most obvious choice: God. So the quest now becomes, how do we explain the conscious observer while negating the notion of God? And more, how do we replace God with human consciousness that is able to observe the cosmos so it can exist and keep existing? One of the ways to work around the notion of God is the theory of many worlds, the multiverse, another esoteric idea dragged into the physics community. Many worlds is a deterministic system, first theorized by Hugh Everett, which states that the particle wave never collapses and all possible states exist in an ever-expanding infinite number of universes. This is an utterly absurd attempt to unite the microcosm with the macrocosm while leaving God completely out of the equation. It's a laughable interpretation that earned Everett much-deserved scorn, causing him to abandon the field entirely. Here's a clip from a recent TV series called Devs, written and directed by Alex Garland, creator of the film Ex Machina, that also utilized the tactic of false dichotomy, by the way, and pushed many worlds. Take a listen.
You're offering a lecture on von Neumann-Wigner?
You would prefer
The Everett interpretation.
Everett. Whose interpretation states that there is no change to the superposition of the humble quantum particle. Rather, there is a change to the entire universe.
It states that the macroscopic superposition exists.
And just so we're all clear what that means, it means the universe is constantly splitting, like the trunk and branches and twigs of an infinitely large tree. And on that tree, all possible worlds will exist.
It's supported by the math, and it's supported by the experiment.
But it's not supported by the real world.
Agenda contributor Michio Kaku loves the multiverse and has performed wide mental contortions around the notion of God, and then worked in human consciousness as the key modifier in wave function collapse. He asserts that the Big Bang could have created an infinite number of universes with conscious entities within them that can observe reality. Take a listen. In his book Parallel Worlds, he postulates that, quote, there is no need to invoke a cosmic observer that can observe the entire universe all at once, end quote. He's even been quoted as saying his theory is the only theory that can, quote-unquote, read the mind of God. According to this perspective, the very existence of the universe depends on its ability to create intelligent creatures who can observe it, and hence collapse its wave function. Of all the theories proposed in the past century, the only candidate that can potentially, quote-unquote, read the mind of God, as Einstein put it, is M-theory, end quote. Agenda contributor. If that title doesn't disturb you, I don't know what will get through to you. Do your own search there. Many contributors trying to make the metaverse, trying to make many worlds, the new worldview for humanity. Why? Because it is a carefully crafted system that completely negates God and biblical cosmology, a necessary component for the coming global government, the new world order. They need many worlds because that system is deterministic. You can't be an atheist and a transhumanist and see the world in terms that leave room for God. It cannot be done. These ideas must be canceled immediately as far as they're concerned. Why is a deterministic worldview important? Because it sets up a zero moral value universe. Moral nihilism. A zero moral universe, or moral nihilism, sometimes called error theory, first theorized by philosopher and staunch defender of atheism J.L. Mackie, states that any moral judgment is a systematic fall into error. Do you think something like genocide is wrong? Well, according to Mackie, you're in error. For Mackie, there exists no moral features in the fabric of the universe at all. Oh, and what a fun surprise. Look who did a talk on this very idea.
We humans control the world because we live in a dual reality. All other animals live in an objective reality. Their reality consists of objective entities like rivers and trees and lions and elephants. But over the centuries, we have constructed on top of this objective reality a second layer of fictional reality. A reality made of fictional entities, like nations, like gods, so that today the most powerful forces in the world are these fictional entities. Entities that exist only in our own imagination. Most legal systems are based on this idea, this belief in human rights. But human rights are just like heaven and like God. It's just a fictional story that we've invented and spread around. It may be a very nice story, but it's just a story. Just as jellyfish and woodpeckers and ostriches have no rights, Homo sapiens have no rights also. The only place you find rights is in the fictional stories that humans have invented and spread around. States and nations are also, like human rights and like God and like heaven, they too are just stories. A mountain is a reality, but Israel or the United States, they are just stories.
The universe must be found to be deterministic, godless, and neutral, and defined only by physical laws for their ideology to work. And if the universe is deterministic, godless, neutral, and defined only by physical laws, guess what? It can be coded and quantified and measured and predicted. And if there are many worlds or dimensions, the conquest then becomes to access them, to create the gateway, the portal to get there. Did you dismiss the idea of the fourth dimension as the stuff of fairy tales and ghost stories? Good for you. You did well. However, there remains a large population of people who are spending enormous amounts of time and money still trying to get there and obtain the magical powers that the hyperspace of the fourth dimension can supposedly provide. And I talk about this at greater length in my CERN, The Simulation, and Many Worlds video. Here's a clip. The concept of the fourth dimension was a popular idea in the late 19th century among spiritualists and mediums. It was thought to be the realm of the paranormal, the ether where spirits dwell. Anyone could access it with special training. Johann Zollner was a German physicist who had prepared rigorous controlled experiments to evaluate the powers of the paranormal of magician and medium Henry Slade. Slade was known mainly as a slate-writing medium, where he would hold seances and claimed spirits would write messages on the chalkboard, but he was exposed as a fraud. But Zollner fell for it hook, line, and sinker, and even published a treatise titled Transcendental Physics, in which he claims Slade was able to perform these magical feats by accessing the fourth dimension. In Zollner's view, and based on his readings of German philosopher Immanuel Kant, the fourth dimension was real, and unless you were properly trained or had a natural gift, you would not be able to see it. The Theosophical Society and the Society for Psychical Research celebrated this thesis and began to promote the concept of the fourth dimension as a spiritual realm in their writings. Ghosts and spirits are thought to dwell in the hyperspace of the fourth dimension. H.G. Wells thought the occupants of the fourth dimension had superhuman powers. Committed theosophist and hermeticist Claude Bragdon was an influential author and architect steeped in occultism and wrote several treatises and books for the Theosophical Society. He is known for his illustrations which illumined many occult and theosophical concepts such as sacred geometry and Platonic solids, and a fictional character he called Sinbad, borrowed from Arabian Nights, that has had many strange adventures in strange lands. In his book, The Frozen Fountain, he experimented with complex geometric shapes he calls projective ornaments that project light and shadows. For Bragdon, the fourth dimension is a realm just outside of our field of perception. Quote, "For knowledge arises from consciousness, and consciousness everywhere and always is conditioned by the vehicle of perception." End quote. Bragdon, who was an evolutionist, in his book A Primer of Higher Space, The Fourth Dimension, he asserts that as humans, which are mere higher animals, through evolution, our senses exponentially evolve and increase. Quote, "If the shifting psychophysical threshold is simply the dividing line between lower and higher spaces, then the whole evolutionary process consists in this conquest, dimension by dimension, of successive space worlds. Everything transcendental exists in some space, and therefore it is possible that by the intention of consciousness, one can first apprehend and then perceive as real that which is now considered transcendental." End quote. Using Plato's cave allegory as his example, by dwelling on elementary higher space concepts, one can break on through to the fourth dimension. In other words, if you can wrap your head around it with mystical training, you can see it and then get yourself there. It's evolution. The mind becomes the portal, the gateway to other dimensions. Accessing higher dimensions is simply an expansion on the esoteric notion of the etheric plane, where ghosts and spirits were once thought to dwell. The secret societies, and Crowley, and Helena Blavatsky, Alice A. Bailey, and all of their contemporaries and devotees celebrated the idea of accessing higher space worlds, the place where superhuman powers could be achieved because a higher plane of existence would come with higher abilities, at least from our lowly three-dimensional perspective. Like being able to pass through walls and to bend space and time, reading people's thoughts, and seeing into the future. Just another clever way of negating the notion of God and turning the human being into a divine being with godlike abilities. What I find diabolically curious, however, is how many of these research teams are using findings at CERN to try and prove this dimension-hopping determinist system of reality as fact. Since CERN data is open-sourced, findings are made available to those who've established that they are on board with the globalist agenda, and there are many research communities dipping in. They aren't looking at the findings at CERN to try and understand what they mean at face value. It's the other way around. They come in the door with a thesis and then try to force-fit these findings into their own theories, which come from this very dramatic, New Age, esoteric worldview and godless system of reality And when the evidence doesn't fit, they insert hypotheticals to make it fit, then spend all their funding and time and resources searching for those missing pieces, all the while selling the idea to the public that it's something that can actually be achieved. What is even more curious to me, however, is how many from this camp are actively working on building this simulation, like it goes hand in hand. They're not just trying to figure out how the universe works, they're building an AI machine god for a computer-simulated reality that they want most of the populace to subsist inside. If they can't reconcile the microcosm with the macrocosm, if they can't prove their esoteric universe with real material science, well, they will just create one, a counterfeit computer-generated world that, as advertised, is so realistic one won't be able to distinguish the simulated reality from the real world. Just like the CERN collective is responsible for the World Wide Web, it's also responsible for the new simulated reality. This is Clee Irwin. He is an entrepreneur, a psychonaut, and a student and devotee of technocratic globalist loons Peter Diamandis and Ray Kurzweil. Clee directs a research facility called Quantum Gravity Research. He preaches extremely alarmist and thoroughly debunked Malthusian, Paul Ehrlich, overpopulation, and static consumption of resources nonsense that's been driving the globalist agenda since its inception. It's cult-creating rhetoric with a very specific end goal in mind. You know, the Earth is mostly empty land, and every resource on the Earth is replenishable. People are born, but they also die, so don't succumb to this alarmist mumbo-jumbo he's trying to sell you here. Focus on where he's taking you with it. As I've discussed in my CERN, the Simulation and Many Worlds video, Clee takes findings from CERN to complete his own thesis, and his thesis has many holes, many missing bits. His main project is working on building the hardware for the simulation. Check this out.
A major amount of my future money will be spent on theoretically and experimentally developing a certain thesis that I have on topological quantum computing. And my thesis is on the hardware, not the software. Elon Musk feels that with artificial intelligence, we are summoning the demon. You know, demon as in Terminator or The Matrix. It doesn't matter, really. And so that's the singularity. When I read Ray Kurzweil's book, then I went to that meeting at NASA's Ames Center, and it just put a cascade of thoughts in motion that led me to thinking about weird, deep things.
This is a clip from the trailer for his documentary, where he provides his motivations and mythos behind his project, which is almost identical to what Yuval Noah Harari was saying earlier. Take a listen.
Things are changing faster. We're in a foot race right now between two very fast runners. One of the runners is the coming collapse of our ecosystem, and the other runner is a fundamental understanding of our universe. An understanding that can lead to a new cosmology that could influence our behavior. Our global mythos makes it okay for us to conquer nature. Species extinction is accelerating exponentially. We are voraciously destructive, like locusts. As we consume the last remnants of the biosphere that support us, the 195 nations of this Earth will get increasingly aggressive about who gets to gobble up the dying remnants. Humans are now running Earth's biosphere, but we're using our power to destroy. And does our power come from our superior teeth or our strength? No, it comes from our superior power of abstraction. It is through the power of our consciousness that we have managed to do what we have done to the biosphere and been able to achieve so far a full 25% of us with a mental illness. Will mankind change its mythos in mass? There is a more modern viewpoint which rejects the old idea that there is this stuff that just is, called energy, space, and time. It opts for an answer most strongly implied by the mathematics and the experiments behind quantum mechanics. A picture where there is no stuff called physicality or energy. There is only information. The self-simulation hypothesis cosmology doesn't say the pan-consciousness just is. And it doesn't say that physicality or even the pre-physical math just is. It explains the origin. It is a new worldview that places information and therefore consciousness at the head of the table as the foundational substrate of reality. It's a more helpful and true mythos or theory at a time where the old stories of materialism and organized religion have failed. And it's the only thing I can possibly think of that has a fighting chance at avoiding destruction.
An interesting tidbit. Remember the ad for the metaverse? Isn't it interesting that there are 3 heavenly bodies incorporated into the horizon? Despite the science that proves the quantum realm is non-deterministic, that doesn't matter. They want determinism to be real. They need it to be real. You can't be an atheist transhumanist, new age trippy hippie Burning Man attending psychedelic Silicon Valley globalist and see it any other way. To think otherwise would leave room for a moral system that includes God and free will, all the stuff that they reject and want to force into oblivion. There can be no freedom of choice in a computer simulation. There is no free will in a deterministic system.
You see, there is only one constant. One universal, it is the only real truth. Causality. Action, reaction. Cause and effect. Everything begins with choice. No, wrong. Choice is an illusion created between those with power and those without.
Einstein believed so strongly that reality was deterministic that he crafted an early evolution of quantum entanglement theory in order to make the math work for a deterministic system of reality. Quantum entanglement suggests traveling faster than the speed of light, and if the Hubble particle can do it, well, then it becomes a celebratory notion for a dimension-hopping, psychedelic transhumanist mystic who wants to garner for himself superhuman powers found in the hyperspace of the fourth dimension, the metaverse. Einstein friend and colleague Erwin Schrödinger built upon this deterministic idea with his superpositioned cat-in-the-box thought experiment, but his views were grounded in the esoteric as well. Schrödinger was very outspoken about his esoteric views. He subscribed to the Vedas, the Upanishads, the Vedanta, and the Bhagavad Gita, all of which he has been known to quote from extensively, much like his contemporary Robert J. Oppenheimer.
I remembered the line from the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita. Vishnu is trying to persuade the prince that he should do his duty, and to impress him, takes on his multi-armed form and says, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds."
What is the Vedas, the Vedanta? Quote, as revealed in these sacred books, Vedanta holds that our real nature, our real self, is pure, luminous, immortal, and free, a manifestation of the infinite divine reality or Godhead. The aim of our life on earth is to realize this divinity, end quote. And the Godhead here is represented by a trinity of creation and destruction gods, of which Shiva, the most celebrated of the three by these dark masons, is the destroyer. Common features of the Vedanta are reincarnation, the desire to be released from the cycle of rebirths, and that all consciousness is one universal cosmic mind. Speaking on his take on superposition, Schrödinger said, quote, the unity and continuity of Vedanta are reflected in the unity and continuity of wave mechanics. This is entirely consistent with the Vedanta concept of all in one, end quote. Schrödinger wrote in 1960 in his book My Worldview, quote, this, as we know, is what the Brahmins were wise men or priests in the Vedic tradition. This, as we know, is what the Brahmins express in that sacred mystic formula, which is yet really so simple and so clear. Tat Tvam Asi, this is you. Or again, in such words as, I am the East and the West. I am above and below. I am this entire world, end quote. Schrödinger continues, quote, there is no kind of framework within which we can find consciousness in the plural. This is simply something we construct because of the temporal plurality of individuals, but it is a false construction. The only solution to this conflict, insofar as any is available to us at all, lies in the ancient wisdom of the Upanishad, end quote. But Schrödinger was more than a mystic, he was also one of these, and even kept a record of his violations in a series of diaries, justifying his actions by claiming he had a right to violate these girls because he was a genius. In a biography of Schrödinger penned by Walter Moore titled Schrödinger, Life and Thought, published in 1989, the author explained that besides being remarkably egotistic, the physicist's attitudes toward women, quote, was essentially that of a male supremacist, end quote. Moore seemed to downplay and even romanticize his nefarious habits, describing him as having a quote-unquote Lolita complex. Take a look at this website from this organization. Here they incorporate this maladaption of quantum physics as an instrument for their New Age religion, as well as providing a portal to the fourth dimension. So hopefully now you can begin to see the underpinning of this dark Masonic mysticism and worldview that is being portrayed in Three Body Problem. One symbol I found very interesting was the three-sun syzygy, triple suns scream esoterica, dating back centuries to alchemy and hermetic traditions, with the sun often depicted as a circle with a dot at its center. And you can see here in the intro for Three Body Problem that very symbol is evident. In alchemy, the magician's transmutation into perfection, to godhood, a process symbolized by three suns that begins with the black sun, or negredo, the putrefaction of the old self, the shedding of impurities. then onward to the refinement and purification phases of albedo and rubedo, and then finally to the divine self, one's magnum opus, pure spiritual gold, the final transmutation into the divine union of opposites, symbolized as a two-headed hermaphroditic being, which would later be represented by the Baphomet. In the Secret Teachings of All Ages, penned by 33rd degree Master Mason Manly P. Hall, quote, "The solar orb, like the nature of man, was divided by the ancient sages into 3 separate bodies. According to the mystics, there are 3 suns in each solar system, analogous to the 3 centers of life in each individual constitution. These are called the 3 lights, the spiritual sun, the intellectual sun, and the material sun, now symbolized in Freemasonry by 3 candles." End quote. For Manly P. Hall, the 3 suns represented the Freemasonic quote-unquote trinity of a Neoplatonic Gnostic godhead. The spiritual sun they called Vulcan, which is an etymological corruption of the name Tubal-Cain, or more specifically the god of Tubal-Cain, who is Baal. The center sun, or the intellectual sun, represented by both the Gnostic Christ and Lucifer, sort of as 2 sides to one coin. These are not biblical characters, let me be very clear. These are perverted uses of these persons, as they apply to a Masonic Gnostic cosmology. Lucifer is the intellectual sun, and his light is the quote-unquote false light, the black sun. Take a listen.
Who are these people that I refer to as the dark occultists? You can call them a million different names, folks. Doesn't matter what you call them. You can call them sorcerers. You can call them dark Luciferians, those who have the light and use it for dark purposes. They are Satanists, okay? They are Setians. They are the Klipotic Kabbalists. Klipoth is the region below the tree of life that is the hell world in the Kabbalistic tradition, that is the inversion of all the true teachings of Kabbalah, of the true moral lessons of the true tradition, esoteric tradition of Kabbalah. That's Klipotic Kabbalah. They are the dark Masons of the world. They are the dark Atonists. Aton was a variation of the sun or the light in the ancient Comitian tradition. Ultimately, it's all one cult, folks. It's the cult of the black sun. You could call them by any name you want, but they are a dark solar cult, okay? When I say the dark sun, why the black or the dark sun? The sun represents light, it represents knowledge, it represents empowerment, it represents life. The antithesis of that, the total polar inversion of that is, it's still a form of light, it's still the sun, but it has darkness within it. So it's knowledge being used for all the wrong reasons. Knowledge being used to control, not enlighten, not uplift. Knowledge being used to put people in a prison. Knowledge being used to being used as a power differential over people who are still in a level of ignorance. So you're blinding people with that light, and you're enslaving them with it. Okay? If you don't even want to look at it in esoteric terms, there are people with the knowledge of how the self works, meaning deep psychology, very ancient, deep knowledge of psychology, combined with people who know about how the laws of nature function, which is very deep, hidden science. That's it. There are the 2 sciences that are at work. The physical sciences combined with psychology.
And lastly, there is the natural sun, created by the demiurge of Gnostic cosmology. The natural sun is the reflection of the true celestial sun, the Gnostic God, who is comprised of pure mind consciousness. The material sun receives its power from the celestial sun in this illusory false world of the demiurge. All of the Masonic orders hold to this 3-sun symbolism that represents a Luciferian trinity, a symbol which they hijacked from the Hindu godhead of creation and destruction gods, Shiva being their favorite because he is the destroyer. Shiva is said to destroy the 3 worlds, the physical world, the world of the forefathers representing culture drawn from the past, and the world of the mind. Blavatsky, the members of the Golden Dawn, and Crowley hated Christianity and Buddhism, so do not think for one second that they hijacked the tenets of these faiths to celebrate them in their original meaning. They hijacked them to corrupt them and then weave them into a Luciferian Freemasonic New World religion that was designed to usurp and then destroy all the world religions, primarily, and most importantly, Christianity. What did Lucifer say in his heart in Isaiah 14? In the Confessions of Aleister Crowley, Crowley's hatred is made clear. Quote, "The Christians are, of course, obscene outcasts. They have accepted Jesus with the promise of a job, and a gag conscience with assurance of atonement, or chloroform superstitious terrors by ruminating on redemption. The Buddhists are sodden with their surfeit of indigestible philosophy, and feebly flaunt a fluttering formula of which the meaning is forgotten, the debauchery of devil dances, the pointless profession of the 5 precepts of the Buddha, the ceremonial coddling of shrines as old maids coddle cats, voluble veneration, and rigmarole religion. Such is the threadbare tinsel which they throw over the nakedness of their idleness, immorality, and imbecility." End quote. I mean, he's practically foaming at the mouth here. But why hijack tenets of Hinduism? Well, it's an Aryan philosophy. These people were tyrannical imperialists and elitists. Hinduism follows the Masonic tradition, as it has no single founder, no single sacred text. And there is a strict caste system in Hinduism. It's a ranked, hierarchical system with the elite at the tippy top just under Brahman, the creator god. But remember, to them, Brahman, Vishnu, and Shiva are not real deities. They are an idea, a metaphor, a force. The Vedas, Upanishad, and Bhagavad Gita are its collections of sacred texts, and it is the Masonic tradition to fold in any ideas from the mystery schools that worked for them and would help them meet their goals. And Buddhism arose out of Hinduism as a rejection of the caste system, a rejection of its priest class, its blood sacrifices, and obligatory civic rituals. Whatever rendition of Satan that Crowley and his contemporaries worked up for themselves in the constant infighting and various rethinks and rewrites of this magical system, Shiva has always been synonymous with the Beast of Revelation, and Crowley wanted to be the earthly avatar of the beast, even calling himself such and adopting, the numbers and everything. If the globalist Luciferian New World Order religion would have a pope, well, Crowley wanted to be it, except they don't call it a pope, they call it the New World Teacher. In an academic journal by David McGillivray, titled Aleister Crowley, the Guardian Angel, and I Was, The Nature of Spiritual Beings and the Philosophies of the Great Beast 666, the author writes that there exists a non-scholarly work by Tobias Churton on the identity of I Was. Churton presented the most complete reconstruction of the magical working Crowley and Rose conducted in Egypt, which conjured up I Was, incidentally, on April 8th, 9th, and 10th of 1904. Do you suppose this might be a new Luciferian ceremonial holiday? Churton draws our attention to the possibility that the whole ritual is explained by a few Arabic letters, which Crowley scribed in his notes. The letters spell Ajiha, which actually is not a word or a name at all. The letters do hold a striking resemblance to a combination of the Hebrew words Shiva, meaning beast, and Ahai, which means I am. The Kabbalistic manipulation Crowley made of these two words is Ajiha, I am beast, which happened to be a metathesis of his own name. In other words, Churton proposes that Crowley might have meant all along that what he saw was himself, his higher self. End quote. So what you get is the force fit of Shiva the Destroyer into the role of the Beast of Revelation, and his number is that of a man, 666. In the three-sun symbolism, Lucifer is the reservoir of the divine radiance. It is this quote-unquote sun that sends forth the various saviors or avatars, otherwise known as mystics, gurus, and false teachers, including the Maitreya, the New Age messianic figure that is believed will come to the earth in a giant UFO and usher in the New World Order. This was discussed and accepted at a UN conference and also publicized through an enormous media campaign by a man named Benjamin Creme. Back in 1982, devotee of Alice A. Bailey, Benjamin Creme, placed advertisements in newspapers around the world announcing "The Christ is here." According to Creme, the arrival of the Christ, whom he called Maitreya, would be heralded by a very bright star, just like the Star of Bethlehem. Included in the advertisements, quote, revitalized Christian churches, that means Christian churches that have adopted the New World religion, as well as Masonic lodges, will be used for purposes of giving mass planetary initiations, end quote. Back in 1959, Creme claimed he was first contacted telepathically by his master Maitreya, who asked him to make tape recordings of his messages. The messages announced the emergence of a group of enlightened spiritual teachers who would guide humanity into the new Aquarian age of peace, brotherhood, love, and sharing. In other words, global communism.
The lead in this respect will be given by Maitreya himself, unannounced as Maitreya, seemingly just one of us, pointing to, acting as a herald of Maitreya, is a new star-like object which has appeared all over the world. Looks like a star, only bigger and brighter and nearer, tremendous brilliance and changing color and moving. When Jesus was born 2,000 years ago, a star appeared in the heavens, which, according to the Christian teachings, guided 3 wise men from the east. Well, that was a star, but it wasn't a star, not a real star, the Star of Bethlehem. It was a spacecraft. Maitreya says there is only one way to achieve justice in the world, to see the world as one, brothers and sisters of one humanity, who from his great spiritual stature would stimulate and galvanize, inspire humanity to create a brilliant golden civilization.
We continue to destroy each other and the world around us. We cannot save ourselves. But we are not alone. 4 light years away, the Santi have achieved miracles beyond our wildest imagination. And now they are coming to share their knowledge with us, to teach us how to survive and to thrive. We must prepare the world for their arrival and prepare our descendants to welcome them.
Benjamin Creme and his organization, Share International. Along with his magazine of the same name, are officially associated with the UN. His magazine, which provides the regularly channeled messages of the Maitreya, is an official United Nations informational document. In Theosophy, the Golden Dawn, Thelema, and various New Age cults alike, this phrase, meaning sun after clouds, represents the new dawn in a post-revolutionary world where Lucifer, who has transmutated into his magnum opus, the Cosmic Christ, and is the victor in the battle at Armageddon, and you can see here the crumbling of the church as a symbol of this victory at the dawn of the new age. In the Book of Jian, Blavatsky's text that she claimed she received through channeling sessions, in which the Mahatmas of Tibet communicated its contents to her in the secret lost language of Atlantis, a work that mishmashes together and plagiarizes numerous occult works. It is this work that laid the foundation for the ancient alien astronaut nonsense and the countless UFO cults that followed, like the I Am Activity cult, where the extraterrestrials are high ascended masters who give special esoteric knowledge or gnosis only to worthy receivers. Blavatsky fancied herself a very worthy receiver, if not the worthy receiver. It is the masters who choose you, not the other way around. You have to be recruited. The profane will not be getting anything from Blavatsky's alien masters. You are lower than dirt. You are a worm, so you can't have it.
In the name, love, wisdom, and power which thou art, to charge the consciousness of each one here with the ascended master present, self, luminous intelligence, substance, and power of light that goes before, giving each student the invincible protection by the power of light, and the invincible directing intelligence, and release through thy love, wisdom, and power in the human octave, and through the divine order and divine channels, thus limitless supply they require, money or anything else. All the powers of the universe rush to their point of focus to render that service which they call for. Mighty I am present in the name, love, wisdom, and power which thou art. I charge this room with ascended master consciousness and presence. Mighty I am present in the name, love, wisdom, and power which thou art. I charge the purse, the pocketbook of each one here. General supply of money that is never absent and is never late. Beloved ones, don't ever again look to human channels for your supply. Turn to your presence and let the wisdom of your presence at your call regulate outer conditions and bring you immediately the supply of money you require. All belongs to the presence. Therefore, as this great momentum goes on in its ever-expanding activity, we thank thee and praise thee forever.
From the book, quote, "The central sun causes Fohat." to collect primordial dust in the form of balls, to impel them to move in converging lines, and finally to approach each other and aggregate. Being scattered in space without order or system, the world germs come into frequent collision until their final aggregation." End quote. Fohat is one of Blavatsky's made-up nonsense words, which is defined as, quote, "one of the most, if not the most, important character in esoteric cosmogony, the personified symbols of the three spiritual stages of evolution. Fohat is the aggregate of all the spiritual creative ideations above and of all the electrodynamic and creative forces below, in heaven and on earth." End quote. She continues, quote, "It is taught that upon the death of one who has attained liberation from the cycle of death and rebirth, the soul goes from the heart of the body to the crown of the head. Thence it goes to the region of the sun god along the solar rays, and entering into the sun, is released into pure divine consciousness, into godhood, the realm of the essence of the body of the highest possible state of enlightenment, Tattvam Asi, that thou art." End quote. And it's a notable detail that the virtual reality technology in Three-Body Problem shows two eyes morphing into one, possibly symbolizing the third eye or all-seeing eye. The physicists adopt new names in the virtual world.
I'm Francis Bacon.
And I'm Copernicus.
Copernicus, who was a scientific humanist intellectual and used occult sources like Hermes Trismegistus, Pythagorean, and Neoplatonic thought to derive his heliocentric model of the universe. And Francis Bacon, a Rosicrucian and Freemason, and author of the novel The New Atlantis, which depicts a utopian society that at its center lies a state-sponsored scientific institution called Salomon's House, where all of God's mysteries had been vouchsafed for its scientific priest class to know and then harness the secret works of creation. Quote, "The end of our foundation is the knowledge of causes and secret motions of things, and the enlarging of the bounds of human empire to the effecting of all things possible." End quote. Theosophists believe Francis Bacon achieved enlightenment and became the high ascended master Saint Germain. Saint Germain was the main channeling conduit for the I Am activity cult. Another film that works from the premise of determinism, many worlds, and the simulation is Donnie Darko. The character of Donnie Darko reminds me of the mythological character Sinbad, who traveled to the strange, esoteric, Neoplatonic lands of higher dimensions, imagined by theosophist and architect Claude Bragdon that I mentioned earlier. Donnie Darko is Sinbad. Donnie Darko begins in the primary universe, with the primary universe as the zero value, and tells the story of a young man who was awakened by a strange rabbit-like entity, saving him from being crushed by a jet engine that mysteriously fell from the sky onto the house where he lived. He awakens in an alternate reality, a quote-unquote tangent universe, and is given a countdown, a specific amount of time before this alternate reality will end. And you can see here, upon his awakening, he is descending, down the mountain he goes, below. Incidentally, during the month of the pagan holiday Samhain, a quote-unquote carnival, where it was believed that the barriers between the physical world and the spirit realm dissolve, allowing more interaction between humans and spirits from the quote-unquote other world. Donnie is suddenly and unknowingly in a duplicate universe, as this event has somehow caused a fissure in the fabric of space and time, causing reality to splinter off into a tangent universe. When a tangent universe splinters off from the primary one, the original universe is put on pause. Just like Augie in Three-Body Problem, the rabbit man, named Frank, gives Donnie the exact amount of time before the tangent world will end. Frank takes him down the rabbit hole, so to speak, like Alice in Wonderland, another carnival-like funhouse experience. The rabbit is an esoteric symbol for spiritual awakening, as the rabbit's role is as a neutral spirit guide, the liaison that assists the dead in crossing the border between worlds. In Alice in Wonderland, Alice falls into a strange portal or hole that transcends time and space. Her rabbit guide carried a watch, constantly pressing for time. The rabbit hole here represents the deep subconscious, a state of very deep sleep. In other words, this all takes place in the mind. The tangent universe is highly unstable and sustainable for only a short amount of time before it collapses. Once it collapses, time in the primary universe resumes from the place it was paused, so nobody would even notice anything has happened.
Darko cheats death, huh? You're like a celebrity, man.
It's interesting that the high school is a Jesuit institution. Everyone is shown here forced into the conformity of school uniforms and empty academic pursuits in the era of Reagan and his campaign of social conservatism, the return to quote-unquote conservative values, which at that time drove 60 counterculturalist intellectuals into a mouth-foaming rage.
Well, my fellow conservatives, I think that's exactly what this year is about. Letting the liberals in Washington discover once again the lesson they refused to learn. For so long, the liberal message to our national culture was tune in, turn on, let it all hang out. And now they see conservatives taking the lead as our nation says no to drugs, and yes to family, and absolutely to schools that teach basic skills.
But Donnie comes to understand this strange anomaly which he suddenly finds himself, which is explained in a book written by Roberta Sparrow, titled The Philosophy of Time Travel. Time travel isn't what you think it is, according to this book. Time travel is moving to higher dimensions, and therefore manipulating time in the primary universe during that process. What I find compelling, however, is that with each guidance from Frank, each destructive act that moves him closer to his deadline, Donnie gets flashes of what looks like computer code, as if some artificial intelligence is behind it all, as if this entire thing exists inside a computer simulation, scenes only available in the director's cut.
Have you ever seen a portal?
Obvious alchemical features like elements of water, metal, air, and fire. The jet engine here referred in the philosophy of time travel as the quote-unquote artifact, which must be made of metal, an important element in alchemy. The base metal almost looks clownish, suggesting an absurdist take on this whole event. Donnie standing before the proverbial funhouse mirror, the portal to the carnival world of the absurd, the higher plane of the fourth dimension where truth resides, where you can bend space and time and have superpowers. And he stabs at it, hoping to penetrate its veil. Frank's eye is illuminated, and then code.
I can do anything I want. So can you.
It's interesting that Roberta Sparrow, Grandma Death, or should she be called Grandma Cheats Death, is 101 years old. Neo's apartment in The Matrix was apartment 101. Of course, in George Orwell's 1984, room 101 was the torture chamber of the Ministry of Love, named for the opposite of its true purpose, the torture of thought criminals, of dissenters, manifesting their worst fears until they submit and give loyalty to the party. There's those zeros and ones popping up again and again and again. In the classroom, the teacher speaks on Graham Greene's novel, The Destructors. Greene was one of those socialist radical intellectuals from the Catholic heretical tradition that I talked about in my analysis of the Exorcist movies. Destruction is a form of creation, a theme you'll hear often paraded through the quote-unquote revolutionary circles, and is, again, symbolized by Shiva. Incidentally, no Marxist philosopher ever had a clear vision of what the world would actually look like after the revolutionaries tore everything in human civilization down. That factor was never mapped out, and it didn't seem to be important. Supposedly, the New World Order would naturally by itself just alchemically rise like a phoenix from the ashes at the dawn of a brand new day, in its perfect form, its magnum opus, a man-made Luciferian utopia right here on Earth. Donnie is encouraged by Frank to engage in a series of destructive acts, all leading up to this future point where the world will quote-unquote end. The obvious underpinning here is moral nihilism and absurdism, which is cleverly presented during the very, very reductionist lifeline exercise, where the teacher gives everybody a moral dilemma, where they have to decide whether it falls into the category of fear or love, which Donnie finds preposterous and refuses to do the exercise, then later mocks Jim Cunningham, this quote-unquote false prophet, who claims to teach the truth, but instead provides only empty, oversimplified teachings that hinder one's path to enlightenment, and he calls him the Antichrist.
I think you're the Antichrist.
If Jim Cunningham is the Antichrist, then who in this story is the messianic Christ-like figure? In absurdist philosophy, Albert Camus theorized that since God doesn't exist, the universe is chaos. Therefore, the search for meaning in one's life is an absurd endeavor. And the only way around this meaningless existence is to rebel, to revolt. According to Camus in his book The Myth of Sisyphus, since God doesn't exist, what the absurd man rebels against is le monde, or the universe. Quote, "As sin is the awareness of separation from God, so the absurd is the awareness of separation from the irrational universe. If Camus could unlock the secrets of the universe to know the unknowable, he could then dominate it. Le monde, or the universe, quote, would no longer be chaos, but a universe ordered by the mind, hence refutable and under my control." End quote. And Camus uses Satan, the ultimate rebel, as the example to compare the absurdist movement as Satan's sin was wanting to usurp God's preeminence by penetrating its meaning and then subordinating it, making the goal of the absurdist is to know the mind of God and then bring it beneath them, subordinating it. In his book The Rebel, penned in 1951, he reveals the Gnostic underpinning in his theory, claiming that Gnostics incarnate the spirit of proud rebellion and protest against a God deemed responsible for human suffering and death. Camus presents the Gnostics as early anarchists before the notion was even invented, and rebels who romantically rejected the yoke of a life of alienation, governed by suffering and limited by death. And of course, alienation is one's knowledge that they are alone in the universe, that God doesn't exist. They're on their own.
Donnie, what did Roberta Sparrow say to you?
She said that every living creature on Earth dies alone.
How did that make you feel?
It reminded me of my dog, Callie. She died when I was 8, and she crawled underneath the porch.
To die?
To be alone.
Do you feel alone right now?
I mean, I'd like to believe I'm not, but I've just never seen any proof, so I just don't debate it anymore. It's absurd.
The search for God is absurd?
It is if everyone dies alone.
The scene I find especially interesting is with the science teacher trying to answer Donnie's inquiries about time travel, and says that a wormhole, meaning portal, created by man, who would need a metal craft to travel in, man-made portals to travel to other dimensions in a man-made vehicle comprised of base metal.
Do you know anything about time travel?
Theoretically, a wormhole in space controlled by man.
So in order to travel back in time, you have to have a big spaceship or something that can travel faster than the speed of light.
Theoretically.
How curious. Weren't we taught that wormholes were created naturally by collapsed stars that become black holes? Since when were they created by man? And what good is a morally nihilistic, godless piece of esoteric social engineering without revealing that the author of the philosophy of time travel was once a nun, but abandoned the faith one day out of the clear blue sky to teach high school science?
She was a nun many years before that, but and then overnight she became this entirely different person. She up and left the church. She wrote this book. She started teaching science.
And in the story, reality here is deterministic, and he's being shown the track lines that everyone is set upon. Which, it doesn't scare him. He seems very amused, the mark of a great recruit, an excellent candidate for the Brotherhood of the Enlightened Ones, the Ascended Masters.
Could these portals just appear anywhere, anytime?
I think that's highly unlikely. No, I think what you're talking about is an act of God.
Well, if God controls time, then all time's pre-decided. Like, every living thing follows along set path. And if you could see your path or channel, then you could see into the future, right?
You're contradicting yourself, Donnie. If we were able to see our destinies manifest themselves visually, then we would be given a choice to betray our chosen destinies. And the mere fact that this choice exists would make all preformed destiny come to an end.
Not if you travel within God's channel.
So what is God's channel exactly? We know the idea of the biblical God is utterly out of the question here. So what does he mean by God's channel? God's channel is Deus ex machina, the God in the machine in a pantheist's deterministic reality. And Donnie is the messianic figure that, after learning the quote-unquote truth, sacrifices himself to save the real world. But why did the anomaly occur in the first place? The story doesn't explain what caused the anomaly, but it's implied. The anomaly, the glitch that produced the highly unstable tangent universe, as it's explained in the book The Philosophy of Time Travel, is that every now and then the fourth dimension gets corrupted. But corrupted how, exactly? The fourth dimension is the realm where choices can be made. In higher dimensions, those who find themselves there have the ability to choose one's destiny and the destiny of all, which is placed in Donnie's hands in the tangent universe. What must he do?
Well, then, knows master plan.
Do you mean God's master plan? Do you now believe in God?
I have the power to build a time machine.
It's explained in the book that the living receiver, in this case Donnie, is chosen seemingly at random, but it's not random at all. Quote, the living receiver is often blessed with fourth dimension powers, end quote. So not random, recruited, selected, but selected by what or whom? Donnie is presented in this story as highly intelligent, nonconformist, who sees reality in absurdist terms, and is fearlessly amused by what is being set before him. Donnie is special, just like the brilliant physicists in Three-Body Problem. It's the genius that makes them special. He is an excellent candidate for Enlightenment, which sets him apart from the herd, like a superhero.
Donnie Darko. What the hell kind of name is that? It's like some sort of superhero or something.
What makes you think I'm not?
The pantheist universe, the God and the machine, sets these people apart, just like the VR system in Three-Body Problem recruits looking for candidates who can solve paradoxes, just like Donnie, who mentions the quote-unquote workers.
And they grow out of our chest, solar plexus.
Just like she described in the book, the way they moved and they smelled, it's like they're workers assigned to each one of us.
Who are the invisible forces of the fourth dimension that get to see reality for what it truly is, and then carry that reality forward, populating, as Arthur C. Clarke imagined in Childhood's End, the Overmind, the conscious, universal, cosmic hive mind.
Everything that has happened on Earth was planned long ago, is natural, is the cosmos, is the Overmind.
You're the Overmind.
A faint reflection of it. I am all, divisible and indivisible. I am the collective consciousness of this universe.
The profane may not enter. Deus ex machina is this population of light workers, the Enlightenment workers. Deus ex machina is the collective. It is the great white, as in brilliant white light brotherhood. It is all the special enlightened human people. Get it? Deus ex machina is quote-unquote our savior.
Machina. What did you just say? Our savior.
Another movie that used Deus ex machina, The Matrix, where in the final installment of the original trilogy, Neo meets Deus ex machina, the God and the machine, face to face. And another portrayal of Deus ex machina as being the collective of enlightened humans was in the movie Interstellar. The tesseract was created with advanced technology made not by aliens, but by people, genius-level physicists, who were able to accomplish the creation of a man-made portal or black hole so they can travel through time. The tesseract allowed Cooper to save humanity from its own destruction. Dark Masons adore the Tesseract for all the reasons I've already mentioned and more. Claude Bragdon talks about the Tesseract in The Frozen Fountain. The Tesseract is a four-dimensional hypercube. Unfolded, it makes a cross with 6 squares. In an article by Freemason and Masonic historian Dr. David Harrison, he explains, quote, "The term tesseract was first used by British mathematician Charles Howard Hinton in 1888, who presented his ideas to the Washington Philosophical Society in 1902 before publishing his book The Fourth Dimension 2 years later. In his book, Hinton presented diagrams of cubic cells, instructing how they could be mentally assembled into a tesseract, explaining that the higher world is four-dimensional. Thus, the four-dimensional tesseract is inaccessible to the mind, just like the concept of God is incomprehensible to humans. The unfolding of the tesseract into a cross allows us to comprehend the three-dimensional image of it, akin to comprehending Christ as a human form of God." End quote. The article continues, quote, "Hinton's ideas influenced an Ordo Templi Orientis ritual decades later, which similarly constructed the tesseract line by line to reconstruct the universe by the magician while reciting a number of Hebrew letters. Hinton's work was certainly an influence on English Freemason and occult author Dudley Wright, who delved deep into the spiritual aspects of Hinton's ideas, the tesseract being seen as a way to access an alternative reality. Wright publishing his own work in 1906 entitled The Fourth Dimension. Wright was attracted to spiritualism and theosophy." End quote. And he became a Freemason in 1912, was exalted into the Royal Arch, and joined a Mark Lodge. He contributed to the Occult Review and worked on the editorial team of The Builder, bringing him into the sphere of U.S.-based Masonry through another Masonic author, Joseph Fort Newton. Quote, "The Theosophist Alexander Horn also discussed the more mystical properties of the tesseract in his book Theosophy and the Fourth Dimension, which was published in 1928. Horn lectured regularly at lodges of the Theosophical Society on various subjects, publishing a variety of works with the Theosophical Press and in journals such as World Theosophy. As an editor, he had worked on Blavatsky's Alchemy and The Secret Doctrine, but it was his work on the Fourth Dimension that Horn is better known, his diagrams of the tesseract and mystical views on the topic still influencing writers and mathematicians today." End quote.